action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, advertising and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chin-wag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp, and I'm Giles Edwards, co-founder and MD. Today, I've caught Bob Hoffman. With the tenacity and bite of a bulldog, Bob calls out industry bullshit with his acerbic wit, no more so than in his highly popular Ad Contrarian blog. The author of 4 Amazon #1 selling books about advertising, Bob's commentary has appeared in the likes of BBC World Service, The Wall Street Journal, The Financial Times and Forbes. He is also one of the most sought-after international speakers in the industry. Bob says, I like to undermine the credibility of advertising aristocrats. My job is to make marketers uncomfortable. So it's with a mix of huge excitement and a smidgen of trepidation that I say, welcome to the show, Bob.
Thank you, Giles. Good to be here.
7 quickfire questions, Bob. Mac or PC?
Mac.
Book or Facebook?
Book.
Independent or network?
Independent.
Ritson or Sharp?
Both.
Good ideas or high-octane solutions that supercharge opportunities for growth?
Good ideas.
Efficiency or effectiveness?
Effectiveness.
And lastly, Zuckerberg or Trump?
Suicide.
Oh, brilliant. Right. So, Bob, can you tell us what your first job, your first ever job was, and how you started in advertising? Okay,
well, my first ever job, actually my first 3 ever jobs were not in advertising. My first job was, as a kid, I worked in my father's dry cleaning shop. I worked on Saturdays and holidays and summers while all my friends were out having fun. I was in the back of a dry cleaning store where it was 150 degrees and smelled like dry cleaning fluid. It was disgusting. I hated every minute of it, but that was my first job. And I did that from about the time I was 9 or 10 until I went to college. Then after college, I was a teacher. And I taught for about 3 years. I was the world's worst teacher. I was not good. Teachers are really special, wonderful people. They're patient and they're nurturing, and I'm neither patient nor nurturing. So I was a really bad teacher.
What did you teach?
I taught science mostly, but I also taught a little English. I taught a little what we called social studies, which was like history and civics, but mainly I taught science. I even taught a little math. And it's amazing that I taught that stuff because I don't know it at all. But nonetheless, you don't have to teach to know, apparently. I was asked to teach at Stanford, right? I taught a class at Stanford University. I couldn't get into Stanford University if I had 10 lifetimes, but I could teach there, right? Unbelievable.
I think I'd struggle to open the door.
Yeah. Then after my failed teaching career, I ran into a friend of mine from college, and I asked him what he was doing, and he said he was working in advertising. And I had no idea what that meant. I said, what do you do? He says, well, the TV commercials you see? I said, yeah. He says, I write them. And it had never occurred to me that civilized people actually sat down and wrote those things. But I said, wow, that's interesting. He said, yeah, you'd be really good at that too. I said, really? What do I have to do? So he told me what to do, and he got me an appointment with a headhunter. And I went to see her, and she told me I would never work in advertising because the stuff that I showed her was terrible. But I had decided that I was going to do that. So I got any writing job I could get. And the first one I got was writing adult fiction. And you know what that means. And I did that for one day. I got hired to write adult fiction. I did it for one day. The thing was, you had to write a book a week, right? And it had to be 150 pages. So you had to write 30 pages a day, and you got $1 a page. And I can't type 30 pages a day, no less write 30 pages a day. So I did it for one day, and then I quit. And I told the guy who was the publisher, I'm sorry, I'm not coming back. And he called me up and he said, I read your manuscript last night. It was really good. I said, my manuscript? Anyway, so I couldn't do that. But, in one day I used everything I knew about sex, and, I was out of material, so I couldn't continue doing that. But it was an interesting day. It was, the place where I worked was in Greenwich Village in New York City, and it was up on I think it was around 6th or 7th Avenue and 4th Street in the Village. It was up above a gymnasium, and it was I was there with people the likes of which I had never met before, and just that one day was interesting to see these people. Anyway, but once I got the idea that I was going to be a writer, I kept searching, and I finally found a job, and I got hired at Panasonic, which is an electronics company. I think it's called National maybe in the UK. But anyway, they're a big electronics company, and I worked in their advertising department for 2 years, writing lots of different kinds of stuff. And then, so that was my first advertising job. And then I moved out to San Francisco and got a job at an ad agency there. And I didn't know anything about ad agencies because I had worked in-house at Panasonic. And so I just went to the Yellow Pages, and the first ad agency I found began with an A. I went over there and they hired me. And and so I worked there for a number of years. I was, a junior copywriter, but it wasn't a very good agency. It was an agency that did like industrial advertising and agricultural advertising. And I got there, and I think I brought, like a wise guy New York attitude to what was a very kind of staid and proper agency. And we started to do well. We started to get some good accounts. And I got promoted to be creative director after a few years. And then later on, I was promoted to president of the agency. And after about 15 years or so, maybe it was 15 years, we had grown to be the largest independent agency in San Francisco. That only lasted a little while because then Hal Riney came along, who was like totally brilliant, and started his own agency, and they shot by us in a second. But for a while, we were the largest independent in San Francisco, and we were bought by an Australian company called Mojo, which was a publicly traded company. And I became CEO of their U.S. operations. U.S. operations meant an office in San Francisco, a small office in Houston, and a couple of people in New York. It wasn't really much of an operation. But anyway, I lasted there a couple of years. It wasn't really my thing. I'm not the corporate kind of, publicly traded company guy. And I didn't really get along well. I tried, but I just didn't get along well, and I left there after a couple of years. And so I left there, and I just did freelance creative work for about 3 years, which was actually a lot of fun. But I missed the agency environment. I always said that agencies are terrible places to work, but great places to hang out. And I missed the hanging out in the agency business. So I had gotten a few offers to come back to the agency. Actually, I almost went to work in the movie business as for a big movie studio as the president of marketing for them. But I couldn't see myself in LA. It's, something that I don't think would have worked for me. So I decided against that. But I did decide to go back into the agency business after 3 years or so. And I joined another small agency, this one in Oakland, California. And we soon moved to San Francisco, and we grew substantially and did very well. And then I retired in 2013, and I have been writing and speaking about advertising since then.
And so to rewind back to being in client side at Panasonic, what was that change like from there to agency side? Because I know us lot agency side like to kind of assume that it's easier to do that step than it is from agency to client side, but that's probably just a bit of arrogance to go.
I actually had a very different experience than I think most people who went from the client side to the agency side, because I went from a really talented client side advertising group to a not very talented agency group. and the people I worked with at Panasonic on the client side were really terrifically talented and smart people. And when I went to the agency side, I don't like to sound arrogant, but I felt like I was the smartest kid in the dumb class.
That's a good feeling.
Yeah. And so I don't think my experience is typical, but that's how it was for me.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think, well, certainly from stories I've heard, I don't think that is typical, but clearly was positive all the same. So, and you said you felt like a wise guy when you went among more kind of staid and proper folk, and then given you went through numerous promotions, presumably you ended up being. Were you wearing suits? Were you a wise guy in a suit? That must have felt uncomfortable. Yeah,
I was. I was a wise guy. Actually, I didn't mind, dressing up to go to work. It didn't bother me. Now it would bother me. Now I don't. Since I retired, I don't think I've tucked a shirt in yet. So I've become kind of a slob. But in those days, I used to like, here's what it was. I came from a background of very kind of lower middle class. We were always struggling to survive. My father got very sick when he was young, and my mother had to take over kind of raising the family, and we were always struggling. And I was kind of, it was kind of a rat family. And then I got into the business world, and it was like a whole thing opened up to me that I never knew about. And I felt good about it. Up until the time I got into the business world, into my first job at Panasonic, I was kind of a bum. Even though I was officially a teacher, I spent a lot of time at the racetrack and in pool rooms, and I was like I was not an upstanding citizen. I was very undisciplined. I had very little ambition, and once I got into business and I saw what it was like, it opened a whole new world to me, and I really enjoyed it from the get-go. As a matter of fact, when I got my first job at Panasonic, it was in Tenement building in New York City, which is a big building on Park Avenue. It's now called the MetLife building. It's right in the middle of Park Avenue. And I used to go there, and I couldn't believe I was working in some place like this. It was so, it was a whole other universe than I had ever experienced, and I liked it a lot. And my first day at work at Panasonic, I said, my whole life I've screwed up everything. I was like 25 years old, and everything I touched I had screwed up. And I said, I am not going to screw this up. I'm going with this. And I became like a super type A from being like a type Z for my whole life. And my first day at work, my boss gave me an assignment. He said, you need to write this. And this is your first assignment. And here it is. And he gave it to me. So that was like at about 9 o'clock in the morning. So I came back at like 11:30 and I said, okay, here, I wrote it. He said, what are you doing? Get out of here. Come back on Friday with this. So, but that's how crazy I got. I really didn't want to screw this up,
And did you get a similar feeling when you started to experience being inside an agency from all that kind of creativity that you would expect? Admittedly, it wasn't a strong agency, as you said.
No, I didn't. The vibe at the agency was kind of laid back. And I used to say that I did more work in a lunch hour in New York than I did in a week in San Francisco. I mean, that was... that was just one person's experience. You can't take that as a generalization, but at the time, that's how I felt. The New York experience was so intense, and the San Francisco experience was kind of, the old cliche about laid-back California. I don't think it exists anymore, but in those days, it was that kind of feeling, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Amazing. And then you mentioned retiring in 2013, and since then, I've heard you say you've been shooting your mouth off since 2013.
Yeah, one of the things about being retired is that you don't give a shit anymore. You don't have to. You don't have to pretend anymore. You don't have clients. And you don't have to play by the rules. And it's been very refreshing to me to say what I have to say without worrying that I'm going to get fired or that my agency is going to get fired. When you're CEO of an agency, at least when I had to be circumspect. Because if I said the wrong thing to a client, we could get fired. And, 15 people are going to lose their jobs. And it's not going to be me. I'm not going to fire myself. So I was always conscious of that. And I knew that, I had 100 some odd people working for me. And they all had families and they had cars and they had mortgages. And I had to be careful. It wasn't just about me getting on my high horse and shooting my mouth off. I had to keep in mind that I'm responsible for a lot of people, and I had to act responsibly. Now, I don't have to act responsibly. I can say whatever the hell I want, and I don't care what people think. And it has been fun. I like it.
It's really refreshing, isn't it, to not have to give a shit. And I'm sure that increases with age. I've noticed myself just caring less and less about opinions and just unloading more.
Yeah, that's the other good thing about getting older as well. Also, there aren't very many good things about getting older, but one of them is you care less about what people do. You realize that I don't give a shit what this person thinks. What do I care? Yeah.
You feel free. You feel free. So I love just quickly. I love Media Snack's analogy of calling you the Copernicus of media, and it's because you went from being seen as this guy, shooting your mouth off or ranting on the fringes, and then increasingly it's got louder and louder and spread more and more widely to arguably become the de facto conscience of the industry. So what's that been like since, the last 6 years?
Yeah, well, it's like, for a long time, I was the imbecile Luddite dinosaur of media, and then I got promoted to the Copernicus of media. It's a nice promotion. And also I like it because Copernicus is a fun word to say. I like to say Copernicus.
It is nice.
Fun. Okay, yeah. And which reminds me, I'm going to change my name to Giles from Bob. Yeah? I don't like it. Yeah, Giles is a great name. It's like a romantic name. You could be like an international man of mystery with a name like Giles. With Bob, what are you? Bob, you're just another slob. Giles, you could be like a secret agent or something. Anyway.
I don't know. Bob's good. I like Bob. It's symmetrical.
That's the only good thing about it. Yeah. Am I the conscience of an industry? No. Nobody's the conscience of an industry. I'm just the conscience of myself. But I like to, I hope that some of the things I'm saying resonate with people, because I think we are completely unaware of the damage that we are doing in so far as, in particular, in tracking and surveillance. I think we don't realize how dangerous we are. The whole online industry is based on tracking and consumer surveillance. It's very dangerous. It can lead to tremendous amounts of mischief on the part of marketers, on the part of governments, on the part of hackers. There is no reason why we need to be spying on people everywhere they go, everything they do. It is, I think, we know what happens when governments do that, right? We know about the KGB. We know about the Gestapo. We know what happens when governments follow people everywhere they go, know everything they're talking about, know everything they say, and have secret files on people. We know that's bad. But we don't know what happens when marketers do that. And that's exactly what marketers are doing now. We have files on people. We know who they're talking to. We're reading their emails. We're reading their text messages. We're following them everywhere, and it's very dangerous. It's not necessary, and the leaders of the advertising business need to be thrown out and replaced by people who are sensitive, who understand what's going on, who can see what's going on, who see the dangers of it, and have a little understand the need for caution in what we're doing. I'm passionate about this because I think democratic societies are at risk with the amount of information that's being collected secretly and without the permission of citizens.
Yeah, I think you're right. And we've got a talented copywriter here who refers to you as much a figurehead for freedom and democracy now, because whilst it's entirely marketing related, the issues within marketing and advertising have now spilled out completely beyond the confines of the industry and become this massive social issue. So you're looking at democratic institutions, the electoral process, journalism, and it's all being damaged.
That's right. And it, the advertising used to be annoying, right? You'd be looking at, you'd be watching something, you'd be reading something. There's an ad. Okay, it's a little annoying, but it's worth it because what I'm getting to watch free television. I'm getting to, I don't pay much for a newspaper because there's ads in there. I listen to the radio for free, and it's worth it. I hear the songs I like for free because there's advertising. So it was a minor annoyance. Now it's a major menace because advertising used to be about giving information to people, about the spreading of information. Now it's about the collecting of information. Online advertising has become about the collecting of information as much as it is about the broadcasting of information. And that's not healthy, and that's not good. And we know it's not good. The thing that bothers me the most is that we're pretending we don't know this. And we do know it. It's in the newspapers every freaking day. But the industry goes along pretending we're not doing damage, pretending we're not dangerous, and unfortunately, it's going to require the intrusion of government into this, because we have shown very clearly and definitively that we're not mature enough to control ourselves. We're not mature enough. We're not mature enough to say, wait a minute, this isn't good. And so it's going to require, I'm not one who's a big endorser of government intrusion into people's lives and into business lives. But in this case, it's necessary because we are not responsible enough to do it ourselves.
And it's getting out of control. So, I mean, if we lift the lid on this problem, is it primarily tracking and surveillance that you see as the root?
That is the root, yes. And if we, there's a lot of things that are going wrong. There's tremendous amount of fraud. There are all kinds of issues now that we didn't have before we had the web. There's fraud. There's the devaluation of creativity. There's I think the delusion of precision targeting. So there are all kinds of issues that I am interested in the agency business now. But number one is tracking and surveillance. I think that is the very first thing that needs to be tackled responsibly.
Yeah, and in fact, you talked about the in your intro to Bad Men, which I believe came out in 2017. You talk about Cambridge Analytica there, and I think that was about 8 months prior to the scandal breaking in the media. Yeah,
that was a moment at which I said to myself, okay, maybe you're not crazy. You know, everyone thinks you're crazy. And the very first thing I wrote about in the book was, in the introduction to the book, the very first thing I mentioned was Cambridge Analytica. And then, 7 or 8 months later, there it is on the front pages of every newspaper in the world. And nobody knows for sure anything, right? So when you're writing stuff, and particularly if you're a loudmouth and you're out on a limb and you're writing this stuff, you think to yourself, am I crazy? Everyone else, thinks this is fine. And you think it's terrible. Are you crazy or what? And when this happened, I said, okay, maybe you're not so crazy. So that was a moment at which I felt good about what I had been doing.
Yeah, and it's so easy to label. I think people label others crazy more so. It's defined more so by whether you're saying something that others aren't as much, or probably more so than it is about whether you're right or wrong.
Right. You label people crazy who don't agree with you. Right. Everyone who agrees with you is a genius, and the people who don't agree with you are crazy. That's how it works in our delusional universe that we live in our heads. And actually, I'm writing a book about that right now, which is...
let's plug it.
Yeah. I don't know if this happens to other people who write books, but I was writing this book and I lost the thread of it. I had a whole lot of stuff gathered up together, and for some reason I lost the thread. Where is this going? And what am I trying to say here? And for like 2 or 3 months, I didn't write anything because I couldn't figure out what I was trying to say. And then like last weekend, I got it. This is what I'm trying to say. And so the title of the book is The Pretenders, and it's about how we have become pretenders on so many issues and delusional about so many issues that relate to advertising and marketing. And it probably won't be done, I'm guessing, maybe the first of the year. If I'm very dedicated, I might be able to get it done by the holiday season. But at least I know where it's going now, which is good.
Amazing. And it's not one of your erotic, naughty books, is it, Bob?
No, it's not. I gave that up a long time ago when I discovered I'm not as naughty as I thought I was. So, yeah.
So the other thing we loosely touched on there is ad fraud. So, does anyone really know what's going on? I think if anyone does, you're likely to know more than many or any. So what is going on in those digital shadows?
Yeah, it's very hard to tell, because in order to understand what's going on in the world of ad fraud, you really have to be either a computer scientist or a software engineer or someone who can get into the code and understand what's happening in the code. That's what I think I have learned. And unless you're in the code and can see what's going on in there, you really don't understand what's happening. And so there's a great deal of confusion in the advertising world about fraud because there are so few people who really understand. The only thing we know for sure is that ad fraud is massive. It's huge. And it's probably stealing tens of billions of dollars from advertisers and marketers. It's no longer just hackers in their mother's basements, stealing $10 here and $100 there. It's organized crime. It's a whole lot of stuff that is growing, and that the people who are supposed to be our leaders are hiding. They're either stupid or they're hiding this. I don't know which one. It is. But it's clear that our leadership doesn't know what's going on. There's a guy named Professor Roberto Cavazzo of the University of Baltimore who studies fraud. Okay, and this is a quote from him. Quote: "I have studied the economic costs of fraud in many sectors for decades, and I was left stunned by the scale of fraud in online advertising." The problem is people like the ANA in the U.S., the Association of National Advertisers, which is a joke, a total freaking joke. They say that fraud is going down. They say that there was $7.2 billion of fraud in 2016, I think, and that has gone down to like 5-point-something billion in fraud in 2018. They are completely wrong, as far as I can tell, by talking to anyone who is a non-interested party in this, the people who study fraud without an interest in it and can get into the code and understand it tell me that it keeps growing and growing and growing. Now, do I know this for a fact? No, I'm not a computer scientist, but the people who I trust tell me that is the case. And I can't understand why the advertisers are allowing this to happen. I understand why agencies and the ad tech industry and everyone else, because they're making money. It doesn't matter to them if it's fraud. They're still getting their percent of what is spent by the marketers. But the marketers are the ones who are paying the price for this and are pretending it's not happening. And I think it has to do with CMOs like protecting their turf. I know for a fact that there was there were that there was an ad fraud research company that looked into a huge advertiser's spending one year and found $600 million in fraud that they threw away on fraud, and reported that into the marketing department, and the marketing department never told the CEO, never told the board. Because how do you explain that you're supposed to be an expert on this and you just pissed away $600 million in a year? So I think there is a certain degree of protection that's going on in CMOs. Now, once again, am I sure of this? No. This is just a hunch I have. But one thing I'm pretty sure about is that there is a conspiracy of silence in the agency business about what's going on in online advertising. I think people know what's going on in agencies and media agencies. They know there's so much waste. They know there's so much fraud in influencer followers who are, enormous amount of fraud in that. But I think there's a conspiracy of silence, of not saying anything. How can it be? We see scandals happening every week in the advertising and marketing world, right? We read about it in the newspaper. We read about it in the trade magazines. None of these scandals are ever broken by agencies. None of them. And yet the agencies are the ones who are closest to the digital media. How could they not know what's going on while reporters who have no real, they're reporting on lots of things. They don't spend all day on online media. How come the reporters know this, but the quote experts on media buying and planning don't know this? It doesn't pass the giggle test. So I think we know what's going on, but are keeping quiet about it. At least that's what the evidence that I see tells me.
Yeah, that conspiracy of silence, as you put it. And in fact, that number, that £600 million or dollars per annum that you've mentioned there, I mean, I've cited that numerous times myself, largely from reading from your Ad Contrarian blog. In preparation for our talk, I actually researched into that a bit more, and I was looking at the ad fraud historian and various other sources, and it's believed, although again no one can confirm it. Of course they can't. That number's as close to 2 billion per annum now, and I think largely the issue is in terms of criminal activity, it's largely risk free.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to make a lot of money fast, go into ad fraud. There is essentially no penalty for being caught. Nobody gets prosecuted for it. And there are tens of billions of dollars being made by crooks, by organized crime, by terrorists who are getting into this and funding their nefarious activities. It's free money if you have no scruples. It's astounding, and it's shocking, and it's disturbing. And we are doing nothing about it. We won't even tell the truth to our constituents about what's going on, no less the public.
Yeah, more needs to be done. Someone needs to take action. And I think, so you and I have talked about this briefly previously, and you mentioned GDPR being at least some attempt in the EU to tackle certainly the privacy side of things. But I mean, even that is clearly too early to judge, so I don't want to be too unfair, but it does feel already like we've turned up to an earthquake with a dustpan and brush. The GDPR was well-intentioned and is well-intentioned, but thus far, what have they done? Zilch. And it's a very complicated. The GDPR regulations are very complicated. There's going to be litigation about them for years because they're so complicated and there are so many seeming contradictions. But I am hopeful that by the end of this year or early next year, there will be some definitive findings
that what's happening in terms of tracking, at least, and surveillance is illegal, and that at least in your neck, in Europe, there will be some sanctions and stuff will stop. Here in the U.S., there's no, it's the Wild West. There's no, although in California, there's something that's supposed to go into effect at the beginning of next year, which kind of mirrors GDPR, but the marketing industry and the online advertising media industry has gotten together to try to undermine that by getting the federal government to pass laws that will undermine the more restrictive state laws. So we'll see what happens with that. Yeah. But the fraud issue, nobody's doing anything about it, essentially. Nobody.
Yeah, that's less reassuring. Before we go into our listener questions, we talked about the devaluation of creativity there. So do you think in part the kind of obsession or move to things which have significant analytics and automated processes like programmatic, has that obsession with data led to the sacrifice of creativity?
The sacrifice of creativity is when the history of the advertising business is written, that's going to be the downfall of the agency industry as we know it. I think we used to be pretty good at something. We were pretty good at making ads, and we could provide businesses with something they all needed, which was imaginative ideas about brands, about communicating with the public. But as we got consolidated and as we became publicly traded companies, investors and Wall Street demanded more than we could make by doing good ads. And this is what my book is going to be about. We became pretenders. We pretended we were data specialists and technology experts and business consultants. And the more we pretended to be these things, the more we became these things. So you got to be careful what you pretend to be. Today we're mediocre at a lot of things and good at nothing. We're mediocre at being data specialists and technology, but as a result of all the money that we've invested in doing these things, and the money we haven't invested in our creative chops, we've also become mediocre at making ads, which was something we were pretty good at. And the result is we're confused about who we are and what we do, and it's not healthy for the industry. I think the industry, so we're seeing consultants eat our lunch. We're seeing advertisers go in-house for creative work. This is just an indication that we have devalued creativity as the centerpiece of what we do as advertisers.
And there's little evidence, as you've said so yourself very well, to suggest that targeting, which is all the consequence of all the tracking that's going on, there's little evidence to suggest that leads to effective ads anyway.
Yeah, there's very little convincing evidence that all this one-to-one personalization tracking stuff is effective as a media strategy. If you think about all the huge brands in the world, all the really successful big brands, the Nikes and the McDonald's and the Coca-Colas and the car companies, how were they built? They were built by mass targeting. They weren't built by one-to-one precision targeting. And if you look at the 20 years that we've had online advertising, where are the huge companies? Where are the Nikes and the Apples and the McDonald's that have been built by online advertising? There aren't any. We have endemic large brands, online large brands. We have Google and Facebook, but they weren't built by advertising. The advertising played very little part in the building of Google and Facebook and those kind of companies. And I walk through the supermarket and I look for brands that were built by online by one-to-one targeting, and I don't find any. I can't find any. And so what is the evidence that we have to believe that the miracle of precision targeting is real? And I don't see it. Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't see it.
I think a lot of that is probably down to, and it's something I increasingly find myself talking about, which is the signaling around an ad. And so anyone who's unsure what that is, it's largely the context that an ad is in, isn't it? And in fact, one of my favorite definitions of signaling is yours. And I have used it so many times already on the podcast. So I'll use one of Rory Sutherland's instead, just to, I say, mix it up. Constantly quoting him, but his point is that there's so much trust in sending out messages completely undiscriminately, and his ridiculously trivial yet brilliant example is when we get married, we say our vows in front of all of our friends and family. We don't go door to door.
Right. Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of value in being famous. If you're famous, if people know you, then now there's no sure things in marketing. All there are likelihoods and probabilities. But if you're famous, the likelihood, the probability of success is so much higher than if you're not famous and if you're not well known. And that's what mass targeted advertising does. It helps you become famous. Now, there are all kinds of ways to become famous. There's public relations. There's, if the press falls in love, the press fell in love with Facebook and with Google and with Amazon. So they didn't have to spend a whole lot of money on that. Now they do. But when they were starting, they didn't have to spend a whole lot of money on advertising because they got famous another way. But that's one in a million happen that way. The way you get famous generally is mass media. Online advertising, we all live in our own little digi-cocoon, right? I don't know what you're seeing. I don't know if you're seeing the same ads that I'm seeing when you're online but I do know that when I'm watching a football game, that there are a lot of people seeing the same ads as I do. And so I can feel confident that when I go out and I buy an iPhone, I'm not doing something really stupid. And people aren't going to think I'm stupid for doing that, because I know a lot of people think or have been told that an iPhone is a smart thing to have. And if we think that people don't behave that way, we're kidding ourselves. Social context of consumer behavior is very important. And people don't want to be thought stupid by having brands that nobody has heard of. And that's part of the psychology of consumer behavior, I believe, whether we like to admit it or not. Yeah.
Yeah, and for anyone who isn't sure on what Bob's wonderful definition of signaling it is, and I've shared it before on the podcast at least once, certainly with Lee Davies, and I think I got some of the words wrong in that episode. So to correct myself, I walk into a room, I announce that I'm the handsomest man in the room. I've said one thing but communicated another. What I have communicated is that I'm a big jerk.
That's it.
I've always loved that, but that whole signaling, the whole precision targeting thing is flawed. If you think about the power of a high value item. So let's say Aston Martin. I can't afford an Aston Martin, but me knowing I can't afford one is important to build that brand.
Yeah.
So why but yet they'd never target me if they were making their decision on targeting me with an ad based on my disposable income because I can't afford one. But actually part of that, the demand around that brand is because people who can afford it know that people who can't, like me, wish they could.
Right. Yeah. It's advertising, it's not brain surgery. A lot of it is very obvious, but we have to make it complicated to justify our fees, right? We have to take stuff that we have to pretend we have knowledge and we have a certain insight into how consumers behave that justifies us being paid a lot of money. And the truth is, most of consumer behavior is perfectly obvious. People want stuff that looks nicer, that tastes better, that everyone else thinks is good. It's not that complicated. Now there is 10% of consumer behavior is mysterious, and but most of it isn't. Most of it is perfectly obvious.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think I'd be a lot richer if I sold some of that shit, but so be it. So asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger, but that's not stopped us asking. So as usual, we've got two questions for you, Bob, starting with Corinne. So Corinne says, ad blockers remain on the rise. Personally, I see this as a good thing and a strong signal against the state of ad tech. Am I right?
No. I'm a hypocrite on ad blocking, and let me explain my point of view on it. I use ad blockers a lot, and I use them because I'm disgusted by tracking, and I'm disgusted by surveillance, and I don't want advertisers tracking me. But the big picture is ad blockers are a bad thing because advertising is essential to the health of the web. And we need advertising to support so many of the things we get for free on the web that we enjoy. I don't think we realize how much of the stuff we get for free from people like Google and Facebook. And I know I'm terribly critical of Google and Facebook for their practices, for their surveillance practices. But I also recognize that they provide us a lot of stuff for free that is useful, that is fun, that we wouldn't otherwise get without them. If they would just stop tracking us, and what ad blockers do is prevent publishers who are healthy and good and not the Googles and not the Facebooks, but the ones that are reliable and doing a good job from getting revenue that they need. And so, like I said, I'm a hypocrite. I think that advertising is essential to the health of the web, but I also think that I use ad blockers a lot because I'm afraid of tracking and I'm afraid of surveillance. So, yeah, I'm a hypocrite on that.
Yeah, I'm the same as you, Bob, to be honest. I think you're right, though. I think your point's exactly right. And perhaps the rise in ad blockers is merely consumers trying to lash back slightly at what has become so intrusive.
Yeah, and online advertising has become so horrible. There isn't even an attempt to be creative in it. The nature of online advertising has become direct response. The overall nature of online advertising has become click here now, direct response. And we know that direct response advertising historically has not been what we think of as creative advertising. It's been very short-term oriented, and we have turned the web into a direct response machine. And that has created a lot of ugly, annoying advertising, which you and I and probably 1.5 billion other people are using blockers to avoid. And that's sad. It doesn't have to be that way.
No, well, here's hoping that we're at least going to start seeing some change, albeit slower than we'd both like. Will asks, are there any speaking gigs in the UK that we can look forward to?
Unfortunately not. I have spoken in the UK 5 or 6 times, and I've really loved and enjoyed it. So if there are any conference people out there who are looking for semi-intelligent speakers, I'm happy to fly over. Actually, I'm going over to Moscow to do a talk week after next, which I'm looking forward to. Yeah. I'm looking forward to that. That should be interesting.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Well, anyone listening, don't think twice. Get in touch with Bob. Get in touch with him now. So the final part of the interview then, Bob, is our 4 pertinent posers that we put to all of our guests. Number 1 is, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Okay. The advice I would give to my younger self would be to spend more of my career on the creative side rather than the management side. I went over to the management side of the agency business at a fairly early age. And I think I could have been a better creative person if I had stayed in the creative department a little longer. I always felt that I never really, for me, the creative part of advertising is really the only part that was ever interesting when I was in the age. Everything else to me was torture. I didn't attend meetings or go to conference. I do all that stuff was torture, but making ads was fun. I liked that. And I wish I had stayed with it earlier. I wish I had stayed with it longer. I have no one to blame but myself. I was seduced by the beauty, the so-called beauty of management, which turned out to be not as beautiful as expected.
Okay. It's interesting to know that. If you could banish one thing from the industry, what would it be and why?
Infographics. I hate infographics. Get rid of them. They're always misleading.
They're everywhere.
Yeah, they're always misleading and simple and too facile. Yeah, let's get rid of infographics. Yeah.
And they're meant to make things easier, and sometimes you just scratch your head trying to work the fuckers out.
Right. Yes.
Number 3 then, Bob, are there any books that you can recommend to our listeners?
Yes. I don't read many books about advertising and marketing. I have too much of that rolling around my head already. I don't need more of it. But some things that I would recommend are, in no particular order, The Anatomy of Humbug by Paul Feldwick, anything by Dave Trott, The Choice Factory by Richard Shotton, anything by Rich Siegel. A book I'd highly recommend is Everybody Lies by Seth Stevens-Davidowitz. Very interesting book. And I'm looking forward to reading, I haven't read yet, but I'm looking forward to reading Rory Sutherland's new book, which I think is called Alchemy. Is that correct?
Yes, that is, yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading that.
So we spoke on that previously, and my recommendation to you and everyone listening is to get the audio book, because Rory not only narrates it himself, but because it involves Rory, there's extra content.
Yeah. I'll do that.
And he gets more royalties, so a financial plug there too.
Okay.
So number 4, Bob, we always like to dedicate each episode to someone. So can you dedicate this to someone and explain why?
Yes, I'm going to dedicate this to my daughter, Lucy, who's getting married in a few weeks. And she's a wonderful girl, and we're very proud of her, and I'm looking forward very much to the wedding. So that's my dedication. Yep.
Amazing. Is the father of the bride's speech being recorded?
It is. I'm going to. No, I can't do that. This is her show, not mine. Yeah. I'm gonna. I'm. She's a lot like me. She gave me my instructions for my father of the bride speech. She said, "Dad, you stand up and you welcome everyone to the wedding. Then you sit down and shut the fuck up." those were her instructions. Yeah, and I'll probably follow her instructions just as assiduously as she's followed mine all these years.
Yeah, payback.
Yes, exactly.
Huge congratulations to Lucy and her partner, and obviously to you and the rest of the families. That's awesome. So we'll this show is proudly dedicated to Lucy.
Yeah.
So as a final call to action, everyone listening, you can head over to calltoaction.co, where we've shared links to everything discussed in the last hour. So all of Bob's books, the Ad Contrarian blog, Everybody Lies, Anatomy of Humbug, all of Dave Trott's books, as we typically do in most episodes now, The Choice Factory, Rich Siegel, I forget the name of his book, but I think he's got one that's just come out, and obviously Alchemy.
Yeah.
Amazing. So, Bob, thank you for joining us. As you know, it's been a real personal privilege and an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Giles. It's been a pleasure doing this. Good luck to you and to everyone listening.
And thank you to everybody listening. Please continue to share and review. That means a lot to us here, and keep the questions coming in. To get in touch with us, simply find Gasp online or email hello@calltoaction.co.
To action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try.